Hello, everybody. I'm Everton de Oliveira, the Professor Agua from the Groundwater Project. And we're here today to release a very important book, one that I liked a lot because that was related to my career. And really, I regretted not having such a nice book when I started working. If you're planning to work with groundwater and petroleum, and that's the title of the book, please don't miss it because it's a very, very good book and an important one you see when you download it. So today we'll have here the authors. We have Yousif Kharaka. He's an emeritus hydrogeochemist with the U.S. Geological Survey at Menlo Park, California, where he has been employed since 1975. He received his BSc honors in geology from King's College London and his PhD in geology from the University of California, Berkeley in 1971. He received the IAGC Distinguished Service Award in 2009 and the Vernadsky Medal in Geochemistry in 2022. Welcome, Yousif. We have here also Brian Hitchon. He was born in St. John, New Brunswick, Canada in 1930 and educated in England, receiving his PhD from Manchester University in 1955. After 2 years as a geologist with the Northern Rhodesia Geological Survey, he returned to Canada in 1957. He returned to the code and joined the Alberta Research Council at Edmonton, Alberta. He is a fellow of the Geological Survey and has been a member of the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of Alberta for more than half a century. And last but not the least, Jeffrey Hanor is the third author, and he's an LSU alumni professor emeritus at Louisiana State University, where he has taught courses in environmental geology and sedimentary geochemistry in the Department of Geology and Geophysics. He was the 1998 Geological Society of America Hydrogeology Division Bird Salt Rice Distinguished Lecturer. And I have to tell you that Jeffrey could not make to the interview today, so we can tell bad things about his back. Just kidding. He's a very nice guy. We won't do that. Before we jump into the interview, we would like to thank all of the Groundwater Project collaborators, authors that share their knowledge and experience, translators who dedicate their scientific and cultural skills, volunteers that reveal and organize the material, and of course, our sponsors who trusted our endeavor from the very beginning, offering their much needed support. And all of you who are using our books, please visit our website, share and like our posts on social media. This is a very simple and effective way to help spread the good word about our initiative, because the world needs water, groundwater. So welcome, guys, and congratulations for your book, Groundwater and Petroleum. Please tell us a little bit about yourselves, your careers, and how and why you teamed up to put together this book. Welcome, guys. Who's gonna jump first? Yousif?
Okay, I will. Brian, do you want to do it or shall I do it? I can do it, sure.
Yes.
So my name is Yousif Kharaka. I was born in Iraq and spent my school there, sort of elementary and through high school. Then I went to England, as you said, and got my BSc in geology from King's College London. And then went back to Iraq, actually, to work with the Ministry of Oil for 4 years. Then I went back came to United States, where now I am a citizen, and went to Berkeley to get my PhD. And at that time, actually, I was working on oil field brines from Kettleman North Dome. So I've been on oil field brines and water rock interaction and oil field environment for the last 40, 50 years and enjoying all of it. I actually retired 10 years ago, but I still come to work every day and go to meetings and even write books.
Thank
It's
you.
really
That's very good for us.
fun for me. It's been a great career, and it's been so John Cherry called me and said, we'd like you to write a book on the impact of petroleum on groundwater. I said, oh no, I had told myself I will never write a book. I know how much time is required, how much effort is required. So initially I said, no. Then I looked at their vision for their groundwater project, which is to educate the world, free education of the world on groundwater. And I thought, this vision, I really have to do it. I mean, there's no money, nothing, whatever stature I have, it's okay. But anyway, then I decided to do it. Then I wanted to call Jeff Hanor, because Jeff and I have written review articles on treatises in geochemistry on oil field brines. And we enjoyed working together. So I called him, would you please be co-author with me? And at the time he said no, because he had some health issues with the family. Then I called Brian Hitchon, who I know very well. We all know each other because we are in the same field. We come and visit each other. We go give talks to each other. We go to many meetings, national and international. So we really know each other very well. And so far, things have worked very, very well for all three of us.
Very good.
And each one wrote parts and put it together and review it for each other and everything else. So it's been a fantastic endeavor, very long, very time consuming. But, since we have COVID and can't go anywhere very much, it's a good time to do it. Anyway, I have enjoyed doing it, and I'm glad I did it.
Just a moment. Jeffrey has joined us. That's very good. Wait, Jeffrey, can you open your microphone?
Hello, Jeffrey.
Hey, Jeffrey.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. So, Brian, what about you? Tell us a little bit about your career.
Okay. My career, I was born in St. John, New Brunswick, and crossed the Atlantic several times before I was 6 years old. And eventually my parents, who came originally from the north of England, settled in Southampton in England, and that's where I first went to school. And I progressed through high school to Manchester University in Northern England, got a bachelor's degree in geology and a PhD on hard rocks, on pegmatites in northern Scotland. That was followed by 2 years with the Northern Rhodesia Geological Survey, regional mapping in the bush for almost 2 years, camping, which I didn't particularly like, looked around for another job and got one at the Alberta Research Council as a petroleum geochemist, knowing essentially nothing about petroleum and a little bit about geochemistry. I was at the Research Council for 35 years and retired some years ago, excuse me, have been retired, will be 92 very shortly, and I have not stopped working. Most of my work has been on the Alberta Basin, looking at the flow paths, looking at the chemistry of the water, looking at the chemistry of the oils as well, and kerogen. So essentially concentrating only on one sedimentary basin, but very many aspects of it relating to the oil industry. And I must slightly correct what Yousif said, because initially John Cherry approached me to write a book on petroleum, and I told him I was far too busy, but that I would highly recommend Yousif. And shortly after that, I got a call from Yousif, who asked me, could I be second author on his book? And knowing Yousif for very, very many years, in a weak moment, I said yes, and I have not regretted it. That's a little bit slightly, you remember that, Yousif? That's a slightly different background. So my contribution has been mainly to describe what is known about the geochemistry of oil-filled waters from a single basin, from the Alberta Basin, knowing a tremendous amount, I think, about the general geology of the basin as well. So that's just
very good. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm still working. I haven't stopped.
That's okay. Well, we like what we do. We work forever. That's what I say to my daughters. Well, if you learn to like what you're doing, you're gonna work for life. That's good.
Yeah, that's
Well,
right.
yes, it's rather like the late Queen Elizabeth, who said that it's a lifetime job. And I think if you enjoy it, go for it.
Sure. So, Jeffrey, your turn now. Well,
Can you hear me?
yes, perfectly.
Oh, all right. I haven't been able to find my screen video, but I can certainly talk with you guys.
Perfect. That's
Okay.
okay. All right.
So what do you want? My life history?
Yeah, a little bit of your career, exactly. And how do you get to, and how do you get to know these other two guys here? There's very nice people. Oh, they don't see you, so they cannot make jokes with you like they're doing at each other.
That's right.
Go.
Well, I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. Went to undergraduate school at Carleton College in Minnesota. Got my graduate degrees from Harvard University. Spent a couple of years as a postdoc at Scripps Institution of Oceanography and joined Louisiana State University in 1970, which was quite a few years ago. Went through the normal sequence of events at the university and retired in 2011. But I arrived in Louisiana, United States, without knowing very much about the geology of that area of the country.
Okay.
Had an invitation to write a chapter in Hugh Barnes's book on hydrothermal ore deposits. He wanted a chapter on ore forming fluids and sedimentary basins. That gave me an opportunity to review the geology and geochemistry of fluids in a number of North American basins, including Louisiana. And that gave me my introduction to this salt dome province. Fascinating. And that's been part of my research effort ever since. I found that in order to understand the geochemistry of these waters, that I needed to know something about the physical hydrogeology. So much of my research has been a combination of looking at geochemistry in the context of physical processes of hydrogeology. So one of the things that characterizes this part of the Earth's crust is presence of salt domes, which dissolve, make sedimentary brines. Sedimentary brines are quite reactive, so they have some unique chemical properties. They have unique physical properties as well, like high densities, which influence what the hydrogeology is like, and also influences what the problems of waste disposal of produced waters are, because you can't use the assumption of constant density in evaluating contaminated sites or planning remediation. So that's a number of things in my background that are related to this present book that Yousif.
Very good, thank you. So guys, I have a question for you. You know, hydrogeologists not familiar with the oil industry, many are not familiar, will be presented to the whole thing at once in your book. That's, like I mentioned to you, for me, it's a book that I regret not having when I started my career. So you have their oil wells, produced water, which is so important and people don't know, and all its components, fluid production, and even carbon storage is in your book. Please tell us, tell our potential readers what this is all about and why it matters. Who wants to jump at it first?
Well, I could start to that one too. I think you are right in that right from the beginning, discussing it between the three of us, we realized that hydrogeologists don't really know the oil industry very well. We know much more about groundwater than they know about petroleum industry. So I think from the beginning, we realized there'll be a lot of books on hydrogeology, but you know, it depends on us to educate the world on petroleum issues and produced water issues. And we wanted to do that in very detailed way, right? Starting from historical times and starting from Drake's well in 1859, and that was only a 70-foot well. But that started, of course, the oil revolution in the United States and probably the world also after that. So we also wanted to make sure that whoever studies or investigates oil field environments take samples of water, produced water and oil correctly, and does it in the field, goes to the field, selects their wells properly, because many wells are sometimes producing from several zones. So you don't know, they're mixing together and things happen when that mixing takes place. So first you talk with the oil companies. That's how we really did it. And my group went all over the United States to Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Alaska, of course, California, and the West. So we have a lab truck that's equipped with all sorts of equipment that can do the filtration, do the analysis, certain things, pH, alkalinity, H2S, some of these have to be done in the field, and then preserve the samples for bringing them to the lab for analysis, for much more detailed, complete analysis of water, inorganic chemistry, organic chemistry, isotopes, both radioactive and stable isotopes. So we thought we will cover all these. And of course, carbon capture and sequestration, global warming is the biggest issue facing the world. Yeah. And it's going to be, the world will have to deal with it in some way, in some meaningful way. Yeah. Up to now, we sort of pay lip service to doing this and doing that. Much more the world has to do to meet the protocol, the Paris protocols of getting the temperature to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial times. So we really wanted to cover all these issues that we think that, well, carbon capture and sequestration will employ many hydrogeologists who are leaving the petroleum industry and looking for jobs somewhere else. We also wanted to include many references. We have a huge list of references in this book, and we wanted the interested reader to, if they really were interested, to go back and look at the original papers and get out whatever information they needed from that. So that was really our goal here, trying to educate as many people as we can on petroleum issues, especially produced water. It's of course is many other problems, and we've covered those. But I'll stop here so that see what Brian would like to add.
I think
Or Jeff.
the most important thing that I can add is that the oil industry has only one real objective, and that is to produce oil, either conventional oil or from oil sands, and to produce it for a profit. If it wasn't for regulators, we would probably see produced waters put into streams, but the regulators and anybody who's worked on the chemistry of waters knows you cannot do that. So the fact that the oil industry, as Yousif observed, is not terribly cooperative in the last 20 years or so. They certainly were years ago. So what we have tried to do is point out the dangers of not treating produced water correctly. And that means not putting it onto the surface. If you put it underground, you simply cannot just pump it into the nearest well. You've got problems with seismic events, even from the disposal of the water. And as far as the whole business of disposing of CO2 and possibly recovering thermal heat from sedimentary basins, both of those involve whatever you can find and understand about the chemistry and the physics of produced waters.
Just a moment, may I interrupt you a little bit? Could you tell our our public what is produced waters? Many of them don't know what we're talking about here, please.
Well, it so happens that we have a glossary at the end of the book that defines what produced water is.
Yes.
Basically, it's any water that is produced when you drill a well for oil, or when you produce oil that comes up to the surface, but the oil is not alone. For every barrel of oil that we produce in the United States, we also produce 10 or 11 barrels of produced water. That's very high salinity. Salinity is usually 5 to more than 300,000 milligrams per liter total dissolved solids. It has oil components in there. It has benzene and many other toxic components. It has radioactive material. So it really has to be, as Brian said, carefully handled.
Exactly.
And it so happens that 60% of that produced water in the United States is injected for enhanced oil recovery. So that's great. But 30% of that is injected for keeping it there underground, away from streams and other things. But from Drake's well to 1960 in the United States, the oil companies just released the oil. And Brian, sometimes oil too came with it, but then of course the oil they collected, and then the brine they released to just go wherever it wanted to go. And it went into streams, lakes, a lot of it went into groundwater and contaminating huge amount of useful groundwater that should not have been contaminated at that time. Sorry, Brian. I hope I didn't.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was very good. Keep going, Brian, please.
I hadn't very much more to add. But the other thing that is often forgotten about oil-filled waters is, first of all, iodine is often produced from oil-filled waters. This time you get something economically valuable other than oil. Bromine is another component that is, you can get it from salt lakes like the Dead Sea, but also the bromine in formation waters may be up to 2,000 or 3,000 milligrams per liter. So that's recoverable. The other salt which is recoverable is calcium chloride, which is Dow Chemical have been recovering calcium chloride from brine wells in Michigan for decades. So there are other things besides being waste produced water. Occasionally you have economic components in it. In Alberta, we've written reports on lithium and calcium, magnesium in the brines in Alberta.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Hey, Jeffrey, you want to add something?
No, I think they covered that quite well.
So they didn't allow you to talk, right?
Right.
That's okay. So I have a question. I'll start with you next then. Okay. So oil industry is by far the largest groundwater producer. Many people don't know that. We're talking about produced water. Why is it so important for hydrogeologists in particular and for the environment in general? What are the contaminants born in produced waters? Brian mentioned something. And how bad can they be for the environment?
Do you
Go,
want
Jeff.
do you want me to start that or
No,
Jeff?
let's start with
Yeah,
Jeffrey and then you go next. Is that okay, Yousif?
Sure. Well, I think one of the most difficult components of produced water to deal with is just simply the high concentrations of sodium chloride, because we're now dealing usually with variable density fluids in terms of the disposal of these waters. And that adds a large level of complexity to the hydrogeologists trying to understand the migration of these variable density wastes. The typical formulations of Darcy's law and using water levels to try to predict rates and how these wastewaters migrate don't work. So we're dealing now with variable density systems, and those are complex. There are actually some books in the groundwater project that are quite appropriate to this problem. One of which is being the variable density flow by Post and Simmons. It's an excellent book that I would recommend anyone in the petroleum remediation industry to look at and realize that just simply measuring water levels in a waste disposal area is not going to work. Now, you're looking for additional components in produced water waste that are, say, toxicity or problems of that sort. These waters have a level of natural radioactivity in them, which is of concern. And almost anything that's dissolved is going to be present in concentrations greater than normal freshwater systems, which We're going to stress the environment. But I would say just surely sodium chloride itself is a major problem. So that's what I have to say.
Yousif, you want to add something?
Well, we already mentioned the fact that for every barrel of oil that we produce in this country, we have 11 barrels of produced water. So the amounts are really huge. So we're talking total for the United States alone between 20,000 to 30,000, 20 billion to 30 billion barrels a year. But on a yearly basis, that's really what we're talking about. It's a huge amount. And even if you talk about the 10% that's not injected either for pressure maintenance or for disposal, there's 10%, even that is huge. So we have to be very careful with that. And as Jeff mentioned, sodium chloride is the contaminant because there's so much of it. The amount of sodium chloride in produced water is 100 times to 1,000 times the limit for drinking water.
Oh, yeah.
So which is only 500 milligrams per liter. And here we have 5,000 to more than 300,000 milligrams per liter total dissolved solids. And it's not only that, there's actually also quite a few other components. Benzene, the limit of benzene is 5 parts per billion. And we have samples that had 10 milligrams per liter benzene, and then toluene and PAHs, which are extremely recalcitrant, but some of them are have so much toxicity worse than benzene. And then there is the toxicity to plants and to soil and land, whether it's oil itself or the components of the produced water, especially boron. Boron is a very, very toxic to many plants, especially citrus plants. It cannot be more than 0.5 milligrams per liter. And we have some that are hundreds of milligrams per liter boron. So there's a lot of stuff that is there that is very bad for the total environment. And of course, not to mention, then we talk about the CO2, and we can cover that at some future question.
Okay. You want to add something, Ryan?
Maybe I can give an example of how important it is to know something about the chemistry of the water. When you drill a well and let's say it's a dry hole, in other words, there's no oil there, but you analyze the water and maybe produce some of it if might or might not have oil, but you have eventually to put that water underground again. And you do this and you hope that when the well has been sealed off and abandoned, that the water that you put down is not going to go anywhere. But once you've put water down, you have to increase the pressure in order for it to go into the formation. That means that that wastewater may move beyond the bottom of the well bore. If the next well over is well sealed, that's as far as it will go. But if the concrete, the cement that is put in at the bottom of the next well is leaking, that water may move up into the well bore, and it is possible, but maybe not probable, that it could reach from quite a considerable depth up to the groundwater. And we have Jeff has mentioned sodium chloride. Well, if you look at the US Geological Survey database of 160,000 analyses, in that you will find perhaps a very small number that report arsenic in the formation water at levels of 1 or 2 milligrams per liter. We have some excellent examples from Georgetown tests in northern Alberta with up to, I believe, 84 milligrams per liter. It's underground now. It's safe now. But if you do a little calculation and dilute that to the chloride value, so that if it contaminated the groundwater, you could still drink that water, you would end up with arsenic poisoning. It's certainly a situation where you need to know far more about the chemistry of these waters, not because they're going to come up, but because as the wells are abandoned and the cement plugs begin to leak, there's always the probability that some very toxic material may get up to the groundwater. That's a story which we have investigated in Alberta, and my guess is that you could look at arsenic in a lot of other waters, and eventually you would find some quite high numbers.
That's interesting example. I have an experience, and I see, because not only from wells, but you know, the lines that go to the oil base where you separate oil from water, the lines, they leak a lot, because you know, when you if you're losing oil, that's very, you know, oil is important, but when it's leaking water, people don't care much. It stays there leaking for a long time before you can change the lines. So when I was doing my work there, sodium chloride was a good, let's say, indicator, was a tracer for us, because you walk there and then you see, you know, the grass or the vegetation is going yellow. So you know, and even if it's a lower portion of the terrain, so the groundwater is reaching there, you see that the salt was there. So we started our investigations always from those situations. Another thing that was a joke, but it was serious, because people, you have the small, you know, small farmers. The guy has a piece of land there, and you know, I don't know, his goats stopped drinking water, you know, and that was a good indication for us. Oh, so the cattle and the goats, they're not drinking water anymore. So contamination has reached that place.
Yeah.
From there, we went to the other contaminants. That's very interesting. So would you have any case studies like that for where the sodium chloride is important? Because for me, from my experience, if we're talking about, you know, lines leaking, that could be regional sometimes, because you have so many leaks for so many years. Well, you can measure contamination in many places, correct?
Yeah.
So in the book, we have given several examples at Osage, Osper sites in Oklahoma, where we studied an active field, and we also studied another field where there was no production for the last 70 years. So we drilled many wells in the field and found that the salinity of that water could increase up to that of seawater, with chloride values, chloride concentrations increasing to about 15,000 milligrams per liter. And of course, that sodium chloride is salinity is very easy to measure.
Yes.
So you can have an electrode that will tell you quickly that,
Yep.
oh yeah, this has a lot of salt or chloride. So, but it has a lot of other things too, as I was mentioning before.
Yeah.
Benzene and boron and PAHs and arsenic and now selenium is not an important part, but several other components that are toxic. And the way they are toxic, we sort of measure toxicity in the in comparison with a table that EPA has that tells you what the good drinking water is, or what a good irrigation water is in terms of the components. What are the maximum contaminant levels in different components? And this thing has thousands of components. So you really look at your water, see it has certain high things in there, compare them with that table to tell you what's going on. If you want to know the origin of contaminant, if you're not sure it comes from a produced water or you are away from an oil field, as Brian was saying, things move in the subsurface, then you have to go to more sophisticated tools.
Yeah.
And one of the easiest one is dissolved organic carbon. In groundwater, good groundwater has less than 0.5 milligrams per liter DOC. No benzene, no PAHs, none of those other organic acid anions. But the minute you mix that with produced water, then those components, we have produced water that we have measured 10,000 milligrams per liter organic acid anions. As I said, benzene in 10 milligrams per liter, PAHs in milligrams per liter, and so on. And then, but beyond that, then you can go to isotopes, strontium isotopes, water isotopes, try to see where it really came from. And of course, you have to examine groundwater regional, much larger area to see where the concentrations are. So that's how we do it in a systematic, scientific way to see how things happen and develop.
Very good, very good. I would like to change a bit. We're talking a lot about produced water, but then what draws the attention of people is when you have an oil spill. We always see, because oil spill and surface, it's black, it's easy to see, so it produces those dramatic pictures, you know, of ducks and things like that, and animals. But then groundwater contamination doesn't produce those dramatic pictures. So how bad could be, you know, groundwater contamination when you have an oil spill as compared to the surface? Who wants to answer that?
I can answer it. Brian or Jeff, do you want to handle that? Or
no experience with oil spills. I'll leave it to Yousif.
Oh, okay. So you are right in that in some states in the United States now, when there is an oil and produced water spill, they clean the oil, but they do nothing. There are no regulations in Texas to do anything with the water, with the produced water. EPA, of course, changed the rules about produced water and contaminating groundwater in the 70s, and they have rules and regulations, but some states don't follow with regard to produced water. Okay, but then oil itself, how much any produced water has significant amount of oil in it as globules. So we has a lot of organics dissolved in the oil, and they have their issues, as you said, benzene and PAHs and so on. But oil itself, there are many spills with produced water, but there are many pipelines in the United States. I have a number somewhere, 400 kilometers of oil pipelines connecting different oil, you know, fields and different wells and different this and that in the United States.
Yeah.
And there are huge, of course, major oil spills, like what happened in the Gulf of Mexico, or that happened in Kuwait, where Iraqis went and opened the wells and let oil go wherever the hell it went, to the Gulf mainly.
Exactly.
We're not talking as much about that. We're really talking about smaller spills from broken pipelines. But even those medium size, there are 300
Barrels.
significant oil spills in the United States every year now. So that's not a small amount.
No.
So that's one of the reasons why, and oil, of course, you said it destroys plants and animals and everything else and has these other components. That's the reason why we wanted to devote a significant part to what happened at Bemidji, where an oil spill and 10,000 barrels of oil spilled in 1979, and the USGS and many others have made that as an experiment, field experiment, and they're studying it for the last 40 years. The oil companies, of course, tried to take the oil out, and they removed about 75% of the oil, but the rest remained. The state realized the oil was getting into the groundwater, just floating on the groundwater. So they said, you have to do more. So the oil company went in and drilled many wells and started pumping oil, but most of that 25% is still in the ground and is adding contaminants, not only benzene and other things, to the groundwater, and is getting into a lake that's not far away. This is one area system that has been studied to death, I would say. But they're coming up with fantastic papers on different aspects. You know, with the oil, of course, is organic matter, so you reduce the sediments and the water there. And what happens when you reduce iron oxyhydroxides? They go to reducing iron, which you can dissolve a lot of it.
Exactly.
And when you dissolve iron, it has other things in it, like arsenic and other contaminant, lead sometimes, and so that actually is happening at Bemidji, where they have, I don't know, 250 milligrams per liter arsenic, and that wasn't there before, wasn't there, not at all. And they have benzene in the groundwater up to 4 milligrams per liter. So this thing has totally been contaminated, and of course the plume is covered a large area. So because of that, we thought we need to devote an important part of this book to petroleum issues, what comes and what happens and how you clean them up and what you do and what are the contaminants in the petroleum section.
Very good, thank you. I was, when you're talking, I was, thinking about my own experience, and you're talking about the dissolved iron. So you go to a very small stream, and you see that you see the red color coming because the iron is is precipitating there, and this is contaminated groundwater. You know because it's reduced, right? And many other aspects. That's very, very nice.
Well, you can have very little iron in reduced water because it's iron in oxidized water, because iron solubility is less than 1 milligrams
when it
per
comes to
liter.
the surface, oxidized, and it precipitates right there. So we can see.
But here you have up to, I think, close to 100 milligrams per liter iron, dissolved iron, that comes out because you're dissolving the rocks.
Reduced water, exactly. Very good. So I have a question for Jeffrey here. Jeffrey was talking about the variable density transport in groundwater.
Right.
Hey, there he is.
Now we see Jeffrey.
Wow, we got you. Hello.
Welcome, Jeffrey.
He doesn't have much hair either, just like Brian. What the heck is the matter with you guys?
I don't know. I don't think I could reproduce what I just did.
You're better than Brian, but you're getting there.
Good. Still not too old to learn, I guess, huh?
Well, you made it. Very good,
well,
Jeff.
We can tell that you're very old friends because you can make freely jokes at each other and you don't care.
We do that all the time.
We do it all the time, yeah.
One of the delights of working on this book with these guys.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. If you don't have fun when you're working with your poles, what's the point, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Let's
So,
see, what was the question?
so the question is about the variable density. Why is that so important? And because you were mentioning the variable density for when
Right.
you're talking about the oil industry.
Variable density.
Groundwater related to oil industry. Okay.
What if you could not use Darcy's law anymore in groundwater problems? Because when you're dealing with variable density, then the concept of using water level, say in observation wells, goes out the window. It doesn't work.
Yep.
So if you're using water levels, you may get totally erroneous idea of what the direction of contaminated water flow is,
Yep.
how fast water's moving, and how to remediate this. The site that I supplied for the section of the book that deals with field examples was a site that was contaminated by variable density waters. And the consultants that were working on that site were using water levels.
Yep.
Totally misinterpreted what the hydrogeology of the site was and placed their remediation trenches in the opposite direction that they should have, the opposite part of the site. So variable density adds a big level of complexity to the physical hydrology of the system that you're dealing with. So it has to be considered explicitly.
Yep. I have a Jim Barker was my supervisor. He works he works a lot on the oil fields in Alberta. He's retired as well. And he had he used to say that when you put like monitoring wells and you don't consider the variable density, he used to call that attenuation by monitoring, because the contamination is just disappearing because your wells don't take it anymore, right? So
that's right.
That's you remind me of that, because that's what happens when you have a higher density contamination, and it doesn't have to be that higher, right? To make a difference.
No, not at all. Just
A
few parts per million.
Yeah.
Maybe not parts per million, but say a few percent extra salinity that'll
exactly. Yes.
throw things off.
There's but then you disappear.
Okay.
That's okay, but you can come back in a moment. Just a second. I have a final question for you guys. It's about the CO2, the geologic storage of CO2. The question that people always ask is it safe? Could it be safe, or could it be done safely? Let's put it in a better way. And are there opportunities for hydrogeologists? Yousif mentioned that already. So what do you think about that? Because this is an emerging field, I believe. I worked on that a little bit here. So what do you think?
So I actually, we worked in the Frio, formation. That's the time where we took oil injected into a well, and we drilled another well 100 feet away from that and looked at what happened to formation water chemistry as the CO2 arrived in the other well. And the signals were very clear. The pH goes way down, alkalinity goes way up, CO2 goes up, and quite a few other things happen. And there were people who were doing geophysics monitoring this one from the surface. And so the question is, there's no doubt in my mind, if we spend enough time and effort on it, we can do it safely.
Yes.
The question is, even at places like Sleipner, for example, they are only injecting 1 million tons per year. And even in other countries, for example, the amount that needs to be injected has to be multiplied by a factor of 100 or 1,000 or so on. What is coming up now for some people is they're talking about CO2 injection hubs. So they collect the CO2 from oil fields, from power plants, from any other source that has CO2, like we'll have one in the Gulf of Mexico, where there's a lot of sources for CO2. And we know from the geology also that there is a huge reservoir there that will be able to inject large amounts of CO2 in that system. So people have now come up with 7, 8 different hubs throughout the world. And they're talking about how much we can put there. And if the world is serious about sort of managing the CO2 and lowering the CO2 in the atmosphere, then that a lot more has to be done. Right in 1919, we released 40 billion tons of CO2. It was only 20 billion in 1991. And so, and the amount really hasn't slowed down during 2021 because of people were not driving as much. But now it's starting to build. Well, you know more about this than we do. So it's happening even more. So the environmental issues related to global warming are huge. Sea level rise, hurricanes, flooding, you name it, they have it. And all those things obviously affect groundwater. There's no doubt about that part. Everything, to me, carbon capture, utility, and storage is the #1 issue facing the world. We really need to do it right. And we need a lot of hydrologists, geologists, geochemists to do it in the right way. And I really believe that that would be a source of employment for many future geologists and geochemists and hydrologists and so on. So
I do too.
That's what the problem, as I think Brian mentioned this before, CO2 injection has problems. Seismicity is one of them. And in sensitive areas, you can have earthquakes, magnitude 5 or even higher in some cases. A lot of CO2 could also, because it changes the pH of the formation water, it lowers it a lot. You can dissolve things and create pathways for it to come to the surface and groundwater. And we have investigated that also in a monitoring site in Bozeman, Montana. So, and things, we know what happens. So the geology science, I think, is known.
It's settled. I agree too.
A lot more field situations have to happen to see what can be done.
I agree. I'll go to more stable geological stable areas or bases, like older bases, like we have some in Brazil that is likely to be used because it's very stable. So I think we should try. So the idea of hubs is a very good one, because probably the storage is the most expensive part of everything, right? So then if you can develop one. So guys, you want to add something? Brian, please.
Yes,
please.
I don't know whether you know, but my publishing company I have a publishing company, Geoscience Publishing, and we have produced 3 books on CO2 disposal, a very general one in the 1990s, and one on a more regional study in the Pembina area. And the latest is on the Weyburn area, which is in southern Saskatchewan, where the CO2 is brought by pipeline from North Dakota, from a coal-fired power plant, and used by by the oil company for enhancing oil recovery. But so that's my sort of knowledge. Those three books between them go from a sort of a regional thing to CO2 being used by a company. But in Alberta, the favored disposal unit is the basal Cambrian sandstone. And we know something about the chemistry of the water, not nearly enough. But the important thing, I think, on CO2 disposal into the basal Cambrian is that if you put a well down, the CO2 itself is put down as a dense fluid. And so you push it down into the bottom of the well and it spreads out. But because it doesn't spread out very far, so over modeling has been done, which shows that over, say, a 50-year lifetime, that CO2 dense plume will go maybe 10, 15, possibly 20 kilometers around the wellbore. But the critical thing, the absolutely critical thing, is that the pressure wave from putting it down will go in the basal Cambrian sandstone over a 50-year period up to 300 kilometers. Now, that means that at the base of any well that's been drilled into the basal Cambrian and sealed off because there's no oil and gas there, if that cement remains good after 50 years or whatever it is, fine. But if it doesn't, the saline water that's in the basal Cambrian sandstone, which is something like 10 times the seawater salinity, it's 350,000 totally dissolved solids, it can leak. And not because the CO2 is doing anything, it's the pressure wave that comes from the force you have to put down to get the CO2 liquid down into the basal Cambrian. So this is again an example like the arsenic one that I mentioned earlier.
Interesting.
That it's not the
CO2 itself.
The problem lies mainly in abandoned wells that are either sealed properly at one time or incorrectly sealed, but in which over time the concrete and cement has got a crack in it, or no longer active for any one of dozens of reasons, and then water can flow up and probably get into groundwater. Not it will get in, but it has the possibility. That's all you need to know. So you have to put your CO2 very carefully where you put it, and you have to know the hydrogeology and the chemistry of that entire unit and hope that you don't have very many wells penetrating it.
Interesting. So would that be valid for, because I understand you're talking about a abandoned oil field, something like that. Would that hold true for like an aquifer, a salinized? You have an aquifer where the water is bad already. It's deep enough.
In the case of Alberta, there's no petroleum produced from the basal Cambrian sandstone. It's a highly permeable sandstone, but people have penetrated it because of the units above, and for exploration purposes. But they're all abandoned. they were abandoned,
I understand.
some of them 40, 50 years ago. And what the cement is like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But the possibility exists because of this pressure wave, that just because you put the CO2 down in place A means that that's not the only place you have to look. You have to look
yes,
for the rest of the formation.
That's quite interesting. Guys, this has been so fun, but our time is up here. We could be talking, forever, because I really enjoy our conversation, and I'm pretty sure people will enjoy your book. So I will ask you guys to make your final remarks, and I'm sorry to leave you out of that, Jeffrey. Please, you want to start with the final remark, Jeffrey?
Sure. Congratulations on Brazilian football.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
They won, yeah.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much. So, guys, make your final remarks so we can leave. I would like to thank you very much. I don't have to. I think I had already stressed enough, but I really enjoyed the book. It's a subject that I love it, and it's so well written. You've done a great job. Congratulations. Please make your final remarks.
Well, I'll start there. So, at the end, we decided to write a long summary and conclusions. Some people were against that, saying, well, they can go back to read the book. Well, to me, that was like an executive summary.
I like
where
it.
people who are not too familiar with the topic can go and get at least some information from the summary itself. So because of that, that's the reason we really have written a long summary. And at the same time, we also wanted to talk about what are some of the issues and some of the major research topics that the hydrogeochemists would be interested in pursuing in the future. And we came up with a whole list of names like that. A couple of them was to do with the geochemical, hydrological, and solute transport modeling codes, writing comprehensive codes to study, to do the modeling simulation of sedimentary basins, maybe in one oil field, or make them bigger to sedimentary basins. To make those things useful, of course, you have to have very good data, chemical data, pressure data, water salinity, formation water chemistry, and all that information, as well as information about the rocks themselves. Yeah. If you don't have those things, those codes will give you answers that are not very useful anyway. Yeah. The only other thing is I thought would want to emphasize has to do with, we have thousands and thousands of oil fields that are no longer producing oil. Yep. So the question is, how do we remediate those? How do we go into those areas and make them useful for people who will be building houses there, making agriculture, doing other things with them? How do we change those fields that are totally contaminated with oil and produced water, salt scars, and everything else, and make them useful for society in the future? To me, if we need to put a lot more effort in that part that we haven't done already. So other than that, there's a lot of other things, as you said, we can talk about. When I asked Bruna initially, how long will this take? She said, oh, half an hour would be enough.
She didn't know that I love this,
You know how much once we start talking, we cannot stop.
Exactly. She didn't know that.
What happens? Anyway, I enjoyed this too, and thank you for saying all these nice things about the book.
No, I'm being very sincere.
Honestly hope that will be useful to a lot of people.
Thank you. Brian, you.
Well, I'm going to summarize. I agree with what Yousif says. I often do, not always, but I often do. But I want to make the point that when I was first asked to produce something for John Cherry, I outlined to him a 40-page book. Much of it was on chemistry of formation water, since that's what he asked for. Not too much on the oil industry. But what has become, to me, very significant is the fact that Yousif has been able to produce the part of the book that I don't have the experience to produce, and that is relating to the oil industry. So I think a lot of the credit for the book that you, Everton, must go to Yousif.
Oh, it's well, maybe.
Well, thank you, Brian. That's
I really enjoy the geochemistry as well, because it's all in there, like I mentioned. It's all in there. What I stressed is the oil industry, because people don't know, but they don't know the geochemistry related to oil industry either. That's the thing. That is the thing, right? So the book is well, it's well organized, because the things are well meshed, and you can read them, easily. You don't see differences between authors in the book. That's interesting. It's very good. Very good.
So where do we go from here, by the way, with this interview? Can you tell us?
Interview. So, okay, guys. So let me finish then, and then I'll talk about that. So, guys, I would like to thank you very much. You've done a great job, and we'll distribute this book throughout the world, because it's a much needed book from my experience, and I talked to many professionals in the area. So congratulations for a job well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you. Yes.